All right, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. The end of the year is quickly approaching, so now's the time to get ready for CECL. So thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, we are in presentation mode, which just means that you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. If you have a question, please click the question icon on your screen, and we'll answer those as throughout the show here. You'll also receive an email with the slides from the webinar, along with a link to the recording on our YouTube channel. So you should get those sometime tomorrow. Let's jump in here. My name is Jason Heinrich. I've been working with credit unions for over 12 years, both on the customer service side and the sales side. We also have Steve Huntington. He has been the creator of our CECLSolver tool, so great to have him here as well. He's certainly the guy to talk to. So, but let's talk about CECL. So, one of the comments that we hear on our demos is, what is wrong with the current incurred loss model? Why the change, right? So this all goes back to the last crisis, and in FASB's opinion, they felt the incurred loss model really did a disservice to the financial institutions by allowing them to not acknowledge losses until they were probable. So that approach used to recognize impairment losses on financial assets has long been identified as a major weakness, resulting in delayed recognition of such losses. After the housing crisis, at that point, FASB had a couple of options, right? Fix the methodology or do nothing. So if you do nothing and the problem reoccurs, well, then you expose yourself to people saying, hey, why did you do something about it, right? So clearly, FASB decided that they were not going to do nothing and they were going to decide to fix it. And, CECL is that fix. So unfortunately for us, it means learning a new way to calculate your reserve. But at the end of the day, really, we're just calculating a reserve, right? We like to say here all the time, right? We are playing the same game, just with a new set of rules. So we're still going to be focusing on reserves, and we're going to go about it in just a slightly different manner. So let's talk about those changes. I think you'll see here there are a number of areas where CECL and the CECLSolver can feel very similar to things that we have done in the past with the incurred loss methodology. And one of the reasons we like the WARM method is its similarities to the incurred loss model. But first, CECL will be different in that we'd be looking at losses over a longer life of the loan approach instead of looking at losses over an annual or maybe like a 2-year look back that most institutions do now with their ALLL. But now you will make allowances for all losses over the life of the loan pool. But there are also some similarities, right? So we're still going to pool assets, make Q-factor adjustments, and make assumptions to justify those Q-factor adjustments. So we're going to build on some of the similarities, but make a few slight changes along the way. But what does CECL mean for you? First, there is no one mandatory method for calculating your reserve under CECL. The NCUA has mentioned several different methodologies, such as the WARM method, but the choice is completely up to you. You choose your path, and you will have to defend this to your examiner and absolutely understand where your final reserve number is coming from and document that appropriately. And that will be the case for any tool or partner you choose. The NCUA has also stated that your chosen reserve methodology matches the complexity of your portfolio. So for most traditional credit unions under a few billion in asset size, a call report driven analysis using a WARM methodology will be perfectly acceptable. So you do not need to engage in highly complex modeling or loan level analysis. So current expected credit loss from theory to practice. So when it comes to implementing CECL, there are some practical considerations to think about. First, how much data have you collected? Do you have detailed loan level data going back at least 5 years? So to do a more complex loan level analysis, you will need to have had this data collected and reconciled before you even start your first actual reserve calculation. In some of what we've heard, that process could take a couple of years. But for other WARM options, what is the true cost? Have you looked at other things like an Excel-based model that, kind of it's free to use, but really, how much actual work do you think you'll have to allocate to calculating your reserve with a method like that? So free options might, not cost a lot of money, but tend to be quite expensive when it comes to your time. How about data from outside your credit union? We have the loss trend. What have the loss trends been in your state? How about losses, and how do your losses compare? Having good internal data is obviously important, but having comparable peer data will be very helpful, especially in areas where you have little to no losses. So peer data can help to establish reasonable and supportable CECL reserves and further support your reserve figure. But in the end, we feel the CECLSolver hits that perfect balance of simplicity and automation while still giving you the ability to add complexity where needed. So that brings us to why we introduced our tool, right? So in the very beginning, we saw the original guidance for CECL, and that guidance was for more complex, massive institutions, and we knew that would not work for most credit unions. So we set out to create a CECL tool that was easy to use, collected relevant data for you, and to honestly create a CECL tool that was just easy to understand and follow. We also wanted to create a CECL solution that was quick to implement and easy to maintain from month to month or quarter to quarter. And we feel we've done exactly that with the CECLSolver tool, which brings us to the live demo. And I'm going to pass it over to Steve. All right.
Thank you, Jason. Give me just a moment to get my screen shared here. Let me know as soon as that pops up.
I can see it there.
All right, well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Now it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the CECLSolver tool. So what you're looking at right now is my screen logged into the interactive tool. We chose a sort of a relatively, decent sized credit union out of Wisconsin as our example for the call today. But the only thing that looks any different as far as inputs from what I just pulled up right now is I went ahead and made a couple adjustments on a couple things just that we'll walk through as we go through the presentation. But the first thing you'll notice when you log in the first time to our CECLSolver is that since we start our default segmentation around the categories that we can get from the call reports that have been newly improved, or it increased the segmentation in the first quarter call reports, and we'll discuss that in detail in a few minutes. Because we start with those segments, it means that we already have access to your entire history of balances, charge-offs, recoveries, past dues by segment, going all the way back in time as far or farther than we need to. And we have that not only for your credit union, but we have it for every other credit union in your peer group as well. And the benefits obviously being the second that you first log in, all of that data is already there. There is no reconciling of accounts. There's no plugging in that stuff on a quarterly basis. We're getting it from the NCUA, not only initially, but every quarter when everyone's filing their call reports, we get the call reports as they are filed. And as soon as that data set's complete, it gets updated automatically in our system. So even on an ongoing basis, you won't have to worry about doing a bunch of data entry or reconciliation type process to get the tool going. As Jason mentioned a couple times, we're heavily utilizing the weighted average remaining maturity, or the WARM method, for our methodology for the CECLSolver. It's certainly one of the more straightforward methodologies that's been vetted and approved by the powers that be at the FASB and the NCUA for CECL compliance, for not for all credit unions, but I would say for the vast majority of credit unions. We get asked frequently, what's up to what size would our tool be appropriate, and at what size do you become, quote, too large to use one of the more straightforward methodologies, and you need to move to one of the more complex vintage completely loan level type methodologies. Of course, FASB nor the NCUA is going to ever give a straight answer to that question. Certainly, obviously, asset size has a lot to do with it, but we have users. Another way to ask the question is, what size range are the users of your tool within? So we work with credit unions all the way from the smallest size, $10 million in total assets, all the way up to probably $3 or $4 billion in loan portfolio, or some of the largest institutions that we have utilizing our tool. So there is certainly no hard cutoff at exactly $1 billion, for example, where this methodology becomes inappropriate and not really defensible. Once you start getting into the $1, $2, $3 billion range, some institutions decide to augment our tool with a little bit of loan level detail on a specific segment that they might have had issues with in the past, or that they have high concentration in. But it still doesn't mean that once you get to that size threshold, you need to kind of throw away the tool you've been using and start from scratch with something that's much more complex. There are steps you can take, in between to still utilize a portfolio level tool with a little bit of enhanced detail in certain segments as you grow to that over $1 billion range. But the first step, just kind of walking through how the tool works, since we're utilizing the WARM method, the first step, unsurprisingly, is to get a handle on the average remaining maturities of the loans you currently have on the books. This is a process that some credit unions have done, but most have not. It's something you can't really get around no matter what methodology you use for CECL, since again, CECL is all about estimating losses over the remaining lives of the assets. And to do that, we have to get a handle on what the remaining lives of our pools of assets are. The easiest way to get the WARM calculations is obviously to simply call up your core or ALM processor and ask them if they can run a report that has those for you. That would be great if that's possible. A lot of times it is not, so we typically don't hold our breath for that. So most of our users are calculating it internally with some level of assistance from QuickRate. It's certainly not an area where we leave you to the wolves to do the calculations. We have an Excel-based, what we call it, our WARM estimator tool here, which shows you exactly what data you would need and how to do the WARM calculation. So you would pretty much cut and paste loan level data into that Excel tool, and it would help you with the WARM calculations. Some of our users, while they could certainly do that if they have the time, energy, and staff, a lot of our users don't have the time, energy, or staff, or just kind of want to offload the whole average remaining maturity process off. And if that's the case, we can handle that as well. We would set up a system, a site where you would upload your, let's say, your Aries file on a quarterly basis, and then we would get that data and do the WARM calculations and present them for you as often as needed. So suffice to say, as much or as little assistance as our users need with the WARM calculations on the front end for our methodology, we can provide. But once we have those WARM calculations done and we plug them into the tool is really off and running and takes care of the vast majority of the rest of the number crunching for us as it pertains to CECL. Now, what I mean by that is, let's pick a guinea pig for today. Let's say used vehicle loans will be our focus. Let's say we'd calculated the average remaining life of our used vehicle loans was 3.25 years. As soon as we plug in 3.25 years, it takes about 2 seconds, and it just recalculated everything across the board on the fly, pretty much instantaneously, as it pertains to used vehicle loans from a CECL perspective. What I mean by that is, if we know the remaining life of our used vehicle loans averages about 3.25 years, we know what CECL is really requiring of us is that we project 3.25 years worth of total losses going forward, right? And so if we're going to project 3.25 years into the future, our tool takes a symmetrical view of the look back period, at least by default, meaning that we're going to look at an actual 3.25 year period in your past and analyze your experience. You know, how did your loan balances change over that life of loan historical time period? How many charge-offs have you aggregated? What direction are those charge-offs headed in? How many recoveries have you had? And we'll aggregate and analyze all that data to come up with the first big piece of the puzzle for CECL, and that is, what is your credit union's historical life of the loan loss rate on that segment? For this Wisconsin credit union, for used vehicle loans, it happens to be 81 basis points. Now, there is a ton of math that goes into that 81 basis points, but have no fear, because the WARM method in general is relatively straightforward, and our approach to it certainly is. All the relevant data that you would need to audit this number right here is right here in our historical analysis tab. Just as an aside, something I think it's important to note, as we work through the tool here and we go through the different tabs, and you'll notice that I'm changing inputs and assumptions, and nothing seems to be happening or recalculating. It's actually all recalculating instantaneously on the fly. So our entire tool is built in the cloud and is interactive, which makes it really efficient and convenient for creating scenarios and updating them over time. Meaning if you plug in a different value, every time you change any input, the entire model recalculates within about 1 second. And you get to see, what inputs really had an effect on your CECL reserve for that segment or for the entire portfolio. It makes it pretty quick to figure out, what's really driving the bus here and what changes are happening on a monthly or a quarterly basis that you need to update the board or your auditors for. So it's very efficient from that standpoint. But kind of back to where we were at, I went to the historical analysis, and now we're going to see all those supporting details coming from your publicly available call reports and those of your peers that go into the summary calculation we were just looking at. So this data, again, is all preloaded the second that you log in for the first time and is updated every quarter automatically by our system. So for used vehicle loans, we determined the WARM was 3.25 years. So we're looking back at 3.25 years worth of data. You'll notice we visually highlighted the look back period for the used vehicle loans. So you'll see we have different look back periods for each segment of the portfolio. Because we marry the look back period, at least by default, to the WARM, it's because intuitively, instead of just choosing a random, completely arbitrary 5 or 7 or 3 year look back period for the whole portfolio, it makes sense to us, and the NCUA has agreed with that as interpretation, that since we're trying to get a handle on losses over the lives of the pools, that for pools that have longer lives on average, we might want to look back at a longer period of history to see what its performance has been like, and certainly vice versa. So for the used vehicle loans, over the last 3.25 years, they've been between $200 and $300 million in assets, averaging 235 million over the entire look back period. And then we start looking at charge-off and recovery and net charge-off data. Now, this is where the wrinkle comes in that started last quarter. As you all know, there were massive changes to the call reports in the first quarter as far as past due assets, loan or losses, recoveries, all that stuff by segment. All the segmentation pretty much was brand new in the first quarter. So we pretty much have everything that was all the segmentation that existed before March 31st of this year, and then all the new segmentation, which is more detailed and better in many respects, but that only starts as of March 31st. So the challenge becomes, how do we figure out long-term historical loss rates on these new segments of the portfolio that didn't even have call codes until, fields until this quarter? So that has to do with mapping the new fields to their most similar relative, right? That does go back 5, 10, 15 years, which is exactly what we've done here. So if I click on the detail, I can expand this and I can see these are the old segments that existed and all these memo items that were there before March of this year. And we can see balances. We can look at charge-offs and recoveries, net charge-offs and net charge-off ratios. Now, all the updated segmentation, which is better segmentation, certainly more granular when it comes to commercial loans. We can look at charge-offs and recoveries and net charge-offs starting as of 3/31. And then down at the bottom, we have the combined segmentation. And we let you know for these segments that are sort of new on the call reports, which historical segment was the most similar, so that we can get long-term trends from these newer segments. And so that's exactly what we've done here. And so we can see for used vehicle loans, over 3.25 years, they have 10, 20, 30, 40 basis points in losses a year. They've had 80 basis points aggregate over the last 3.25 years. And so that's your, if I head back to the summary, we can see where that's coming from. So it's kind of a long-winded way. I did want to take you through the numbers a little bit so you can see that every single value on this entire tool can be very easily calculated, audited, checked, and driven straight back to what you publicly filed on the call report. So very easy to track, trace, and audit everything in the tool. Now, once we have that, right? Once we have the first half of the puzzle, your historical experience by segment, the second half of CECL, more or less, is all about the fudge factors, right? All of those qualitative factor adjustments that cumulatively represent all the reasons that we think current and future conditions might be similar to or somewhat different from the historical conditions which resulted in these values we just finished calculating. So this is where we head over to the Q factors tab. So the Q factors tab, this is kind of your home base for making adjustments to your historical experience, right? So we show you here exactly what that historical experience was, and we allow you to make adjustments based upon peer experience, based upon economic data, which we give you some of here, and also add any other qualitative factor adjustments you see fit. We're making an enhancement to this page, which is going to give you suggestions for those other internal qualitative factor adjustments based upon interagency guidance. It's that same guidance that we've always had, right? Changes in portfolio mix, changes in underwriting standards, those types of suggested potential Q factor adjustments that you guys are already dealing with in the incurred loss methodology that we've had forever, at least for my lifetime. But this is where you can add in and decide which of those kind of somewhat standard qualitative factor adjustments you want to make. Let's say you're making changes based upon changes in underwriting. You make changes in underwriting standards, and you can come in here and you can make a 10 basis point qualitative factor adjustment here. So you can make adjustments anywhere you want throughout the portfolio for whatever specific factors that you deem appropriate to do so. And as you make all these adjustments, the system, adds them all up and provides a net qualitative factor adjustment. There's also an area right here, which is an administrative function, but extremely important for the tool. This is where you can leave notes on your qualitative factor adjustments, your justification and reasoning for them as you go along. So this is kind of where you start building your narrative, right, around why you made these adjustments to your historical experience and why they're appropriate. And that's an important part of the entire process, whether it's examination or auditing, that you document, and so that they understand exactly what assumptions you're making and where you're making them. As soon as you make any of these notes here throughout the portfolio, they get saved along, they get kind of attached to that segment throughout the analysis. Whenever you save a scenario, whenever you export the tool, all those get saved forever. So at any point in time, you can come back to this scenario that you ran in June of 2022, and you can show it to an auditor or an examiner and show what you were thinking when you made those adjustments. You'll also notice that as I click through the portfolio here, all this data updates. So this is just kind of a visual summary of all the most important elements of CECL right in one chart. It's a great tool for kind of explaining what's going on to the board and following those trends over time. So if I click on residential junior liens, so HELOCs and whatnot, and I can see in one chart what your long-term trend in losses was, that's the blue bars, what your peer group's long-term trend in losses was, the green line. The gray shaded area is the look back period that we're using to sort of start estimating the CECL reserve. And the orange line is what that CECL reserve is based upon all the inputs that we've plugged in so far. So if I were to change my Q factors, you would see the CECL estimate go up or down on the fly. Now I made a large negative adjustment here based upon peer experience. Why did I do that for this sample? Well, let's say you're in this scenario. You've got a healthy portfolio of home equity lines or loans. It's had, for the last 7 or 8 years, had almost negligible losses. And then 6 months ago, you have one large charge off. It was one relationship. It was a non-recurring kind of one-time situation that you don't expect to spill over. It's very isolated, right? That which is exactly what happened to this credit union. As you can see, all of a sudden out of nowhere, they had a 3% charge off last year in their home equity lines and other, junior liens. That's not a situation they expect to recur. So yes, it's in the historical record. Yes, it's going to be calculated in your historical loss ratio, but no, you don't expect that moving forward. And you have a further argument that you don't expect it moving forward because you've now analyzed not just your data, but everyone else's in your peer group. Meaning you've gone with this peer data that I'm about to kind of walk you through the details of how we get all of it. We do the same analysis for your entire peer group that we do for your credit union. So we can look at all of the junior lien mortgages in your entire marketplace, and look at what losses they've had. And so you can see outside of your four walls, what kind of losses are there in the market. And you can use that to justify making an adjustment to your historical loss rate up or down based upon, the specifics of your portfolio. So let's jump right to the peer data. So again, as we were doing this, right, as we were aggregating all this voluminous historical balance, charge-off, recovery data, all that stuff, we're doing the same analysis for every single one of your peers in the background. So just crunching millions of data points in order to get this. What this represents are peer weighted average loss rates by segment, apples to apples segmentation, right? Using all the same segments we're using for you, and going back in time, the same look back periods that we're using for your credit union. So it's a perfectly comparable historical lifetime loss rate for your peers by segment. And so you can see when I say your peers, I know the question I'm sure is coming if it's not already on your mind. What do I mean by your peer group? Well, when you're looking at peer data, and it's going to take a significant role in any analysis like this, you better be pretty sure that your examiners, auditors are going to be pretty comfortable with the peer group you choose, because it's a large assumption to make. So by default, we kind of attach you to your NCUA peer group. So if you remember, the NCUA sticks everybody in one of 6 peer groups by asset size, right? The smallest credit unions, the ones under 2 million in assets, are in peer group 1, all the way up to the guys over $500 million in assets or 500 million in assets, and they're in peer group 6, and everything in between. So we start with the NCUA peer group, and then we allow you to go up or down in peer group size. If you're sort of on the border between a couple asset ranges, you can go up or down and see what the peer data looks like at a smaller subset or a larger subset of peers. And we also allow you to play with the geography. So instead of just looking at national, so this is all of the credit unions in the entire country that are over $500 million in assets. So what if I just wanted to look at the western region of the country? And so I want to zoom in on just the western region as defined by the NCUA when they kind of split themselves up administratively between those 3 regions. What was it? East, west, and south. I believe they did that like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So I clicked on this. It took about 5 seconds, and everything updated, meaning it pulled all new billions of data points in order to now calculate just for the western region of the country. Or if you want, you zoom in even further and just look at large credit unions just in the state of Wisconsin. And if I want to go down a bump, I can say, well, let me just look at the $100 to $500 million credit unions in Wisconsin. So you can just play around with the peer data here and get a feel for what's happening in your marketplace, right? What happens to credit unions in Wisconsin as they get larger? Do auto loan losses tend to accelerate as credit unions grow in size in the state of Wisconsin or in the Western United States? Just kind of putting my analyst hat on here for a second, I could have a field day just playing with the data on this tab separate from my own historical loss experience. But I digress in the interest of time. But suffice to say that you choose a peer group size range, asset size range, and geographic scope that you think is the most appropriate to compare to your credit union. And that's what you use as the peer data for. Then you come into the qualitative factors, and you can make any adjustments to your historical experience based upon that peer data. All the peer charts obviously updating on the fly as you update your peer group choice. And if I head back to the summary tab here, it kind of presents that data here as well. So you can see what your historical loss rate was, what your peers' lifetime historical loss rate was, just as a reference as you work through your Q factors. And once you're finished with all your Q factor adjustments, you come back to the summary tab, it updates, it pulls that net adjustment right here into the summary page. And then at that point, we've pretty much arrived at our expected future loss rate. It's just your historical analysis, lifetime historical loss rates, plus or minus the net of all of your adjustments to that, equals what your expectation is moving forward for lifetime loss rates. Once we have that value, we apply it to your current portfolio balance, right, in order to do our final CECL calculation. Now, by default, these current balances are going to be most recent quarter end. That's all that we have access to publicly from the call reports. However, that does not in any way limit how often you run this tool or when you run it as of. Meaning that if you want to come in here and run this as of June 1st, and you don't want it to be as of March 31st, come in here and say, all right, I'm changing the date to June 1st of this year. Then I'm going to come in here. I simply have to override these quarter end balances with your month end or beginning month balances from your GL. So you'd override these balances with a slightly different balance to represent June. And then the entire analysis and CECL calculation is as of whatever date you plug in those current balances. The last piece of the puzzle is to deal with any individually assessed loans that we have to deal with. Now, a question we get asked frequently that we don't have a good answer for yet because there just isn't a good, strong feeling for it yet, even in the regulatory community, is exactly what that threshold is going to be under CECL for when we need to individually assess loans. We have a pretty good idea of exactly what that threshold has been historically, right? We not only had TDRs to help us determine that threshold for individually assessed loans, but we also had the old notion of impairment. Now, the colloquial term impairment still continues, but the exact definition of impairment under the incurred loss methodology ceases to exist. The old FAS 5 and FAS 114 that we're still dealing with doesn't exist anymore starting in January of next year under CECL. It's replaced by the CECL standard. But does that mean that you never have to individually assess any loans? Well, unfortunately, no. I mean, we try to keep them pooled as much as humanly possible, but there will be loans where you have, default is imminent and you have a pretty good, well understood idea of what that loss might be, and they're very collateral dependent. Then those are situations where you still have to individually assess them, and you can do that right here using our tool. You'd come in and you can either do it at the individual loan basis and plug in the loan information for the individually assessed loans and just let us know what loans, what call report segment it comes from so that we know what bucket to pull it out of, so to speak, so we're not double counting losses. Or you can do it at the aggregate level. If you have another spreadsheet you want to attach where you do your own individual assessments and you're just going to add them all up for all your used vehicle loans and you just want to plug in the total for used vehicles, you can do that either way. Once you plug in that information, you can see it pulls right back into the summary here. So for used vehicle loans, 253 million in total loan balance, 900,000 individually assessed. So you subtract those out, and we apply that the expected future loss rate to the remaining pool, the 99%, so to speak, to calculate a CECL reserve. And then down here at the bottom, we pull in the reserve for the individually assessed loans. This is also where you not only would update it for more current balances if you wanted to run it on a more frequent than quarterly, like monthly. This is also where you'd make any adjustments to your current balances. If you have any loans or balances that are completely outside the scope of CECL, meaning if you happen to have any PPP or COVID loans still on the books in your commercial portfolio, right? You'd want to net them out of the balance here. If you have any sizable portion of SBA loans that have a large government guaranteed portion of it, whatever portion is government guaranteed, we'd want to pull out of here. Another example relevant to credit unions is fully share secured loans. Let's say that you have that would be in your all other secured non-real estate loans, your fully share secured loans. Let's say you had 10 million of those. You'd come right in here and you'd make sure you netted out $10 million, and you made a note right here that we netted out 10 million fully share secured. So pretty much any balance where if there were a loss, it wouldn't be coming out of your reserve, right? It wouldn't be coming out of your pocket. We don't want to establish reserve for that population. So we can net it out right here and make a note of it so we know exactly what we did and why. Once we've made any of those adjustments and we pulled out our individually assessed loans, we pretty much can do a CECL calculation for each segment of the portfolio. We can add them all up. We can layer back in the individual assessments. And then we have one final piece. This is not something I typically like to spend too much time on these initial calls, because it is typically a very small piece of the puzzle from a dollar perspective. But FASB is going to be requiring all credit unions to be calculating a separate CECL reserve for your unfunded commitments, completely aside from the rest of your loan portfolio. It's going to be a new line item on your call reports starting at the end of next year. I'm sorry, at the beginning of next year, you'll have a line item below your ACL for loans. You'll have an ACL, or allowance for credit losses, for unfunded commitments. So you're going to have to come up with some methodology for calculating that. So that's exactly what we've done here. We've given you a little module to help you with that calculation. It's all a little bit hypothetical, because honestly, to summarize it, what they're asking you to do here is project potential future losses, long-term losses, on loans that don't really exist yet, right? So it's all going to be a little bit, hypothetical. But you have here, you start by pulling out your unfunded commitments by segment. We can get that data from the call report. There's not a lot of segmentation. It's not the same detail of segmentation that we have for the rest of the loan portfolio. Of course, that would be way too easy for the NCUA to have done it that way, but they certainly chose not to for whatever reason. And so now these are the segments that we now have. And by the way, there were more segments before March 31st. So, and I guess in the NCUA's trying to throw a bone to their constituents by, quote, reducing the number of fields that you guys have to fill out every quarter, now you've got 6 different segments that you have to calculate unfunded commitments for on the call reports. These are those commitments, or those segments. Then we have to net out any that are unconditionally cancelable. So we can pull this right off your call report. The unconditionally cancelable amount we cannot pull off your call report, because it's not something that they ask you for. But it's probably the most important piece of the puzzle for this part of it, because any amounts that you can deem unconditionally cancelable, you can simply net out of the calculation, and you don't have to worry about from a CECL perspective. Credit card lines, unused credit card lines is a perfect example. That's pretty much the definition of unconditionally cancelable, right? At any point in time, you as the credit union can decide to freeze or remove available unused credit from someone's credit card line. You don't need to jump through a ton of legal or regulatory hoops to do so. So you can always net out your credit card lines. Typically, you can always net out the overdraft protection commitments as well, because right in the customer agreements that you have people sign when they open up these types of accounts, it says at any point in time, you or the customer can cancel the account. And so typically they're unconditionally cancelable as well. Whatever is not unconditionally cancelable becomes our net unfunded commitment. That's the amount we gotta jump through some mental hoops here to estimate some potential future losses for. And so we go through the process of estimating the probability of funding, and then estimating what kind of losses we might see in the future if they were to be funded. And we give you some good default values here with some good explanations of how we came up with those defaults to help you on your way. But you will have to do a little bit of work in here to make this accurate. It's not something you need to spend weeks pulling your hair out about, I promise, because it's just not a very big piece of the puzzle financially, typically. But if you need some help with it, we can certainly walk you through it, and we can work with you on a one-off basis. That being said, that's as much as I'll talk about that today. It feeds into the summary right here, and then you add it all up, you get a total CECL requirement. We can compare it to your current reserve amount under the old methodology as of today, and then the surplus, the difference is your current surplus or shortfall. All right, I'm gonna take a breath for a second. That was pretty much how the tool works on a step-by-step basis. I do want to talk a little bit about how you manage the tool administratively, because that's important. The entire tool, again, lives in the cloud. It's all interactive. Whenever you're done building a scenario here, before you go anywhere else or log off or anything else, make sure you save it as a new scenario. Click on Save as New, give it a name, give it a date so you know when it is as of, and click Create. As soon as you do that, everything in your scenario is saved, never to be lost. It's in the cloud. You can access it anytime you want to. You can have as many people in your institution access it. We don't limit the number of members of your credit union, not members, sorry, of employees you have at the credit union there that can access this tool. So you can have multiple logins if you want. There's no additional cost or seat licenses or anything like that for additional users. And you can save as many scenarios as you want to. I'm going to resave this one because I made a couple modifications to it. And so you click on this, and this drop-down box will go down forever. So you can literally create as many scenarios as you want, and they'll be organized right here. As a best practice, we highly suggest that every time you have some new data or it's a new month or quarter, you come in and you can pull up your old scenario, update your balances, right? Take a fresh look at your historical trends, see if they changed very much since last quarter. Look at all the notes you've made on your qualitative factor adjustments and adjust any, and then update any individually assessed loans, and then save it as a new scenario 1 month or 1 quarter later. And then this becomes a repository of all your saved scenarios over time. So you can track exactly what's been happening with your CECL analysis as we move through this year and come on closer to implementation date at the beginning of next year. And you can demonstrate to your auditors and your examiners that A, you have identified an appropriate methodology for managing your reserve under CECL. B, you understand how that methodology works, what assumptions are going to move the needle, what's pretty irrelevant given your situation, et cetera, et cetera. 3, you have a pretty good idea of what your surplus or shortfall is going to be on day 1 of next year, that day 1 adjustment we're all going to have to make. And then D, we're tracking those values over time to see how that CECL reserve is going up or going down as we move through the economic environment we're in. Those are the things that your auditors and examiners are wanting to see from you going forward now. And our tool is purpose-built to show them, demonstrate to them exactly that, while providing you a tool that's very flexible, very easy to manage. When you're done with a scenario and you want to export it so that you can send it to that examiner or auditor, or you want to give an update to your board, you have full control over what you export, how much granularity or detail that you export. So when I click on export, I can say I want the whole kit and caboodle because I'm sending it to my auditor and he wants all the nitty gritty. Or maybe I just want the summary data and maybe some peer trends and maybe a summary of my Q factor adjustments. So you can pick and choose exactly what you want. Maybe you want some of the economic data in there as well. So let's say you want this data and you want it in a PDF. So you click PDF. It takes just 4 or 5 seconds typically, and it generates an Adobe Acrobat PDF file, pops right up here in a new tab in the browser with exactly the information that you needed. I think I chose all the peer data and the economic data, so that takes an extra few seconds to generate the file, but it should pop up momentarily here, unless my internet is acting slowly. We'll give it just a second.
Well, wait for that, Steve. Quick question. What would you do for loans without maturity dates? How would you calculate the ones on those?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I might have clicked on something wrong here. Let's just do this data here. Oh, there, now the PDF pops up. See, whenever I lose my patience, that's what I should do every time. Get frustrated after 2 seconds and then click off of it, and then it'll pop up for me. So here's a PDF. I'll get to the question in just a second. It's a good one, Jason. Here's a PDF export of the entire tool. Here's the summary data. Here are the notes that we made, organized by segment on any of the summary segments. Here's all that historical data with the visual look back periods that we wanted to pull up. All the historical data. Here's all the peer data. Here's a summary of the qualitative factor adjustments and any notes that we've made on those. And here's a bunch of economic trends, statewide unemployment rates for your state, GDP growth, prime rates, crude prices, CPI, interest rates, et cetera, inflation rates, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how you would export that into a PDF environment. Also, if you wanted, let's say, just pull this data, but you wanted to pull it into Excel. The nice thing about the Excel export is that it pulls all the data directly into Excel, but it still allows you, it still has all the spacing and shading and formatting of the interactive tool. So you can come right in here, pull up the Excel file. That's not it, this is it. And you can add extra columns, add extra rows where you make some more notes. It's not a fully functional formulaic model, obviously. That has to be done in the interactive environment as we pull in data. but it does give you all the shading, all the spacing, all that historical data in a format of Excel that you can do whatever you want with it, create additional charts, all that kind of data. So that's a great thing about the Excel export as well. To answer Jason's question, how do you calculate a WARM for your credit card loans? They don't have a stated maturity date. So how are we supposed to estimate what the average remaining maturity is without a stated contractual maturity date? Well, to do the WARMs on credit cards and any other ones like those that don't have a stated maturity date, we use the payment data as proxy. So we have to make a universal assumption that no additional credit is given. Obviously, if someone's going to continually put balances on their credit card, it's never going to get to a zero balance. It's never going to, quote, mature. So we take the current balance as it is today, and then we look at the recent payment history and interpolate. If we don't have principal and interest payment data, we just have total payment data, which is pretty typical for a credit union in an Aries file. We interpolate what the principal payment typically looks like for that user and for that customer. And then we say, well, if they keep making that similar payment every month going forward, how many months or how many years until the balance becomes zero, right? So it's kind of time to zero balance given similar payment experience or payment history going forward. That's our proxy for a maturity date for credit card loans. And so just as a hint, if you're doing that type of a calculation and you're coming up with a WARM of 4 years for your credit card portfolio, you're probably not doing something right. That's way too long, given the fact that probably a half of your credit card users are paying off the entire balance every single month, right? And not revolving anything. For all those users, their WARM is what? 1/12 of a year, right? It's 0.08 years or something. So averaging those guys in, we typically see WARMs for credit cards around the 1 year mark. So that's just kind of a basic guidepost to give you an idea of whether you're doing that right. But again, if you need help with the WARM calculations for those, you can reach out to us. We're happy to help you and walk you through it, or even do the calculations for you if you just don't have the resources to do it internally. Were there any other questions that came up, Jason, while I was droning on?
No, that's just it. Yeah, that pricing.
All right, great. Yeah. So Jason will get to pricing in just a second here. I'm wrapping up my spiel as it is. So we walked through the tool. We showed you how to save scenarios, how to export the tool. Whenever you have access to the tool, you have all these other resources at your disposal as well. There's a visual step-by-step user guide that shows you exactly what you need to do to run your tool, to update your tool. It's very user-friendly guide with lots of screenshots and best practices in there. There's a methodology guide, a white paper we've authored about CECL for community-based institutions, some language you can use for implementation letters and policy language. Reach out to us. We can help you with that as well. Here's another link to that Excel-based WARM estimator tool that you can download and keep locally. Here's the results of our recent SOC 1 audit. So if you have questions about, whether if our methodology and our tool has been audited, so to speak, it has, and so we completed a SOC 1 audit. So if you need that for your due diligence, that's there as well. And then here are just some of the better industry resources that we've seen from the NCUA, from FASB, from some of the bank regulators that just kind of talk about CECL in general, and then CECL specifically for community institutions, and then the appropriateness and applicability of the WARM method. These last couple ones being the most appropriate to read to give you a higher comfort level that the methodology we're using is one that's been vetted by the powers that be on the regulatory and the accounting side, and it has. And this isn't something that we developed in a vacuum by any means. Before we even started developing our tool, we sat down with the top people at FASB who were working on CECL. We sat down with the chief accountants over at the NCUA on multiple occasions and talked to them about what we were planning on doing, shared with them our progress, and walked through our entire tool in detail, very much like I am with you all today, with FASB, with the FDIC, with the NCUA, with all of them on a couple different occasions, and have gotten great feedback about the appropriateness of the tool. And again, we went through the SOC 1 type audit of it as well. And we regularly give seminars not only on CECL in general, but on this methodology specifically. And we do some educational webinars for the NCUA and FDIC examiners as their participants in the webinars we give. So this is our area of expertise when it comes to CECL. And we did build the tool completely in-house from scratch. It's not some sort of product that we sort of acquired from some other group or institution, and we're trying to manage it. So rest assured that if you're using our tool, if you have questions about the numbers or the calculations or anything else, you can always get us on the phone to help you walk through it. The last thing that you want is to be using some third-party tool and have an examiner in your office asking you about it, and you can't figure out where the numbers are coming from, and you can't get anybody on the line who knows what they're talking about. I've been there. You don't want to be there. And that's not something you ever have to worry about with QuickRate and our analytics products. So hopefully that's some level of comfort to everybody. I think that's everything I wanted to point out here interactively, Jason. So if you want to take the screen back, and then I'll briefly talk about a couple other slides, and then you can take it home. All right, so while we did the live demo using the screen, using my browser, as if you were logging in yourself, I wanted to have, for all of you who are printing out a PDF or a copy of this presentation afterwards, I wanted to have a couple screenshots directly in the PowerPoint presentation or PDF. So these are just a couple summary slides that show you how the tool works. So you can scroll a couple more down. Something else that we just added a couple months ago, it's since we've now have access to all this credit union data historically for the entire industry going back a long period of time, we get lots of requests from credit unions around the country to say, hey, can we just see like a financial summary of our credit union or some of our peers, just a quick kind of snapshot with some basic ratios and financial data that we can organize, and we can go back in time and we can look at peer data, and we can just kind of get a feel for our historical performance or the historical performance for any other credit union in the country. So this is a new tool that's available for all of our credit union CECL users, no additional charge or anything else. It's just a way for you to search for credit unions and look at historical financial data or look at mapping and branch level data. The other page we gave you guys is sort of this is a great filtering tool. It's also available free of charge. It's just what we call Credit Union Universe at a glance. You can choose a geography or a region, and it just kind of lists all the credit unions in your area or your state or region. And you can sort by, assets or loans or fee income or operating expenses. You can sort by any one of those or filter by any of those, so you can get a feel for what the other credit unions in your neck of the woods look like and how they're performing. This is also a great way to identify who's in your NCUA peer group. We get questions all the time, say, hey, for CECL, I'm using NCUA peer group 4, the $50 to $100 million credit unions in California. Who are those credit unions? Well, you come here, you click on California, and you sort it by assets, and you see all the ones that have between 50 and 100 million, and that is your NCUA peer group by state. So it's a great way to get that kind of peer data as well to justify what decision you're making about that from CECL. Go ahead, Jason. So these are just a couple extra slides. We already talked about this to an extent, but I wanted to stick it into the presentation today, something for you to read at your leisure. This is just reminding everybody what happened at March 31st with all the loan segmentation as it pertains to CECL, because it was a very big deal for loan portfolio tracking and asset quality tracking over time. The NCUA was very well aware that the timing could not have been poorer for updating and massively changing all the call report data that relies on asset quality history at a time when everyone now needs to look at historical asset quality trends for CECL. But they did it anyway. So this just reminds you how everything works with our tool and how we've updated it for the new method or the new segmentation. This is what it looks like, right? On the left were the 9 segments of charge-offs, recoveries, and past dues that we always had historically. On the right are the 20 new segments that we have. All that red data is all brand new. So 75% of the asset quality data on your call reports is all brand new starting last quarter. And then I think I have one more slide about that as well that just gives you an idea. If you scroll one more, yeah, all the red is brand new. So a wholesale overhaul of asset quality data. Something that I mentioned before that we're going to be enhancing and adding to the tool in the next couple months here. If you go to the next slide, Jason, is these are that interagency policy statement that we've had on the books for a good while that give you common suggested qualitative factor adjustments. You don't have to make all these adjustments, and you don't have to make these adjustments for every segment of your portfolio. They were just guidance that the interagencies gave us years ago that we can still use under CECL, right? The Q factor portion of CECL is the part that can look very, very similar to what you're already doing in your current reserve methodology, just with a bit of a different twist to it. And so the next screen will just give you an idea of, you can add all those, common Q factors to your tool if you want going forward. Changes in lending policies and procedures, all those terms that you guys are already probably very familiar with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we give you basically a full toolbox, and y'all really decide what you want to use. So
yeah, you can remove, again, not only do you not have to use all those Q factors, if you don't even want them in the analysis, you can completely delete the columns. And so you're not showing a Q factor adjust, if you don't have any changes in your loan review systems and you don't want to make any adjustments for that, you don't need to be showing it to your examiners and giving them another thing they need to ask you about, right? So you simply delete the whole column. This is just suggested ones to help guide you in this process.
Absolutely.
And then as far as, go ahead, Jason, you can take that.
It's on the warm support. We have about 250 credit unions that are currently subscribed to the CECLSolver. And first off, pricing on CECLSolver, it's asset-based. It's all going to be a little bit different just because we wanted this to, not have one size fits all. We want it to work for all credit unions, whether you're, 8 million and about to hit the cutoff to, the 4 billion, which someone again just signed up at that asset size. So it's all going to be a little different. Just reach out to us and we'll get you that pricing. With the warms, it's really been kind of hit or miss. About a third of the credit unions that have signed up are having us help them with the warm. So some of the information that we'll need, or if you don't know if you can get it, the information we're looking to get is current balance and maturity date. That's the two big pieces of the puzzle. And then we need to be able to sort everything out to the appropriate loan bucket, right? New car, used car, whatnot. But look to see what you can get now. There's probably some sort of CECL report that your core has that they may be working on. Start with that and kind of go out to see what data you have access to. At the end of the day, though, if you need help calculating the warm, we're here to help you with that. So, kind of brings us to the end here. Well, what's next, right? Well, I recommend reaching out to us for a demo. We can go through it using your data. I just had a really big call today with a credit union that was ready to sign up or thinking about it, and they had a really big a current recent loss that they're going to have to kind of think about. It's really kind of blowing up their model. And I said, hey, now's the time to kind of have this conversation with your examiner. So don't wait to the last minute. Let's get out there now, get started sooner than later, because there's still some work that's going to need to be done. And getting that first baseline, what is your real baseline CECL reserve number can take a minute. So while everything
just to jump in here, Jason, that brings up a good point. We've had lots of discussions with the NCUA about CECL in general and our methodology and all of our users. And they've stressed, the lead examiners over there have all stressed that they're well aware this is new and difficult and challenging for for all their credit unions, and they're going to be flexible and they're going to be somewhat patient, even after the end of this year, going into next year, that this is going to be a process, and that this is all, as detailed and confusing as this seems, this entire thing we've talked about is just so that we can try to make an estimate for one value on the call report. Yes, it's an important one, but it's an estimate, and because it's a forward-looking calculation. So the best thing you can do is get started now. Share where you're at with your examiners next time they're in, whether it's 6 weeks or 6 months from now, so that they have an idea and they feel comfortable that you're kind of on the right road. And as long as they feel like you've got a handle on it and you know where you're going to, they're going to be relatively understanding. And that's again something that the marching orders that they're giving throughout the NCUA from everything that they've directly told us. So hopefully that allays your concerns or fears a little bit.
Absolutely. Yes, and has been our sales webinar. We also do a different version of this, our coffee talks, more of an open forum type session where we bring on our current users and those who are really in the process of starting to sign up for the CECL solver. But we bring in guest speakers. I think we're going to have an auditor here just to explain CECL from their perspective, right? This is going to be an evolution over the next couple of years, as Steve just said, right, in our conversations with the NCUA. So there's going to be a lot of changes that are going to happen, and these are just great to keep up to, the updates that are kind of happening with the tool, and just different takes on CECL in general.
Yeah, and sharing ideas back and forth. We have users who it's a very informal webinar, and it's been extremely popular. We've got hundreds of credit unions shock every single month that come on to our coffee talk, and they ask really good questions that we haven't heard before, and we get feedback from users in real time from their auditors and examiners and best practices. And CECL's been a moving target for years now, and it's going to continue to be somewhat of one. We had some auditors on a couple months ago who lent their perspective on our tool and CECL in general, answered some good questions. And I think either in July or August, either next month or the month after, we're going to have another auditing firm as well join us. But it's a time to just kind of come in, ask questions either publicly or anonymously, and we answer them right there live on the coffee talk. So it's a great format for our current users and for new potential users.
Absolutely, yeah. Just one of the many ways we're looking to help with this transition, right? There's going to be a lot that's happening, so let's get everyone together and just kind of see what you've heard. So check it out. We moved it back from 11 to 11:30 just to give the one before a little bit more time. So just be aware of that.
That's always been at 11 o'clock every single month for the past 6 months. It's now going to start at 11:30 to give me a chance to me and Sean a chance to breathe between before we did another one beforehand. So please join us at 11:30, and even if you can't make it, go ahead and register for it, because that means everyone that registers, we're going to go ahead and send you a copy of the whole presentation and the video and the audio and everything afterwards. So even if you can't make that exact time, go ahead and register so you can watch it at your leisure.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. I think that's everything for me. I have no more questions, so I appreciate it. I'll leave this up here. Reach out to us at info@quickrate.com. Let us know. Let's take you on a tour. Let's go look to see. Again, we pulled all your data so we can get a good idea of where you're going to be heading in the CECL. So thanks for joining us today. Steve, anything else?
That's it. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks, y'all. Have a great day.